weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
We're live.
Okay, welcome everybody. We're so glad you're here today. Pastor Tim Karskaden here, Christian Center Shreveport, and we're doing our noon prayer watch today. We got a great episode that we're looking forward to speaking over you and to prepare you for what's about to happen. We title it today, Word Salad or Deliberate. Unusual title, I realize, because you've heard that term in relation to Kamala Harris, and we're going to explain what that means. We're going to give context to that during our episode today. We have a lot that we're going to pack in. I got, fortunately, our house historian, Randy Grigsby, with us, and also my son, Zach. So I'm not going to be talking as much. I really want to ask the questions, and let's build a platform for you and give you foundation on how, one, we can always pray, but also how we can dislodge the plans of the enemy in this hour. I think it's critical. I did a sermon yesterday. This is like the third one or so we've done on this, on the Tabernacle of David, but about false altars and godly altars. And those are different terms, tabernacle, portals, whatever. And what we're seeing is that we in our nation right now, we're having a battle between the two altars, the altars of the Lord and the altars of the enemy. Enemy altars are built not on purpose sometimes. They're just ideologies that have a convergence of people that agree with it. And when they agree with it, they build something to the entity of what produced that concept or that ideology. And I'll give you an example. Randy and I were talking before we came on the air here. I've been to Nuremberg, Germany, where Adolf Hitler stood on that stage. If you ever seen the old show videos and pictures where there's this massive hundreds of thousands of people out there, and he is standing there, you know, speaking like a preacher over them all. That actually was considered what we call the Pergamon altar, where you see in the book of Revelation is where Satan sits. And matter of fact, that altar has been moved to Berlin now. And that was his goal, was to invoke power. Adolf also, I read in the book Hitler's Cross by Lutzer, one of the things he said that they found that in one of the museums in Germany, there was a spear that they believed that pierced the side of Jesus, and the Germans had captured that, and they had it in a museum, and they said Hitler would stare at it for hours, and he would say things like, "Let the power that's in that spear be imparted to me so that I may invoke the same thing," which was the killing of the Jews. So these are altars that were built during that time. Well, you know, that's more occultic, but now we have ideology altars, and that's what you serve another god, a false god. And anything that's not biblical, when we look in our political arenas, that we're building ideologies right now to let government be the god of a nation. And so we now have a party that we're seeing, the Democratic Party. I'm not saying there aren't some in the Republican Party that are like that as well, but as a platform, we're seeing it presented today. And the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, starts today and all week. So we want to be in prayer. One, we want to pray against any evil, like assassination attempts, and like, well, some of you are like, well, we should just let this happen this week. No, we don't want that to happen for anybody. There's prophetic words that were back in 1968 again, and I'm going to let Randy start there when we start our discussions here. 1968 was a volatile time in our nation, and we're in such a parallel moment that we don't want to miss it. In 1968, the Democratic Convention was in Chicago. In 2024, it's in Chicago. We already see protesters of over 100,000 possible protesters are coming for anti-Israel protests. They've put a fence all the way around the convention center, a wall, because they want to be protected that potential evil people could come against them. That's a parallel to our border of not putting a wall up. They're not concerned about the people who live on the border. They're concerned about where they live. And I think that's a parallel picture that we got to see in the spirit of what's going on and also have the answers. We want to build godly altars, places of worship where we need to find out where the enemy's building something and see it dismantled by the Lord's altar or the Lord's tabernacle, the David's tabernacle. And I said this yesterday in my sermon. The Lord always wins. And you hear this in my podcast. I talked about that today. But we have to build it properly. And so today we're building. We're building an altar here. We're building a place with revelation for you, both natural. This natural revelation has a spiritual context to it, but it'll help you in your prayer life and building up your heart to go before the Lord on how to tear these things down. So as we get started, Randy and Zach, we'll let you both talk about this. But Randy, kind of give us the parallels now between 1968 and where we are. Some of the things that you saw happen, because you lived that, you were right in that era, and I was only 8 years old, just to say that. But I was 8 in 68. But I'm just joking. But really, what are the parallels? What are some of the same things you're seeing?
Well, Zach and I did a couple of months ago. We began to compare 1968 to present day, and it's even more so today, Pastor Tim. There was three factors that compare with now in 1968. First of all, there was continuation of a war. And of course, in my youth, it was the Vietnam War. And it was beginning to become very controversial by 1968, 1969. The historian William Manchester said 1968 was the year that nothing happened like it was supposed to. Everything came unraveled. It was a year of chaos and collapse. So there was the war. Of course, now we've got the Israeli war that's going on, and it's causing a lot of conflict in society, that we've got people that aren't supporting Israel, and we have people that are supporting Israel. And it's growing to be a nationwide or a global battlefield or stage, if you will, with that war. So we had the continuation of a war that proved to be unpopular. There was Russian aggression in 1968 in Czechoslovakia.
Yep.
And, of course, we've got Russian aggression in the Ukraine. So we've got a comparison there. And then, of course, this is always the case. It's not unusual that 68 and present day would have it, but there was always trying to establish peace in the Middle East. And, of course, in 1967, it was the Six-Day War. And the results of the Six-Day War, when Israel counterattacked against Egypt and Syria, and it only lasted 6 days because Israel fought an offensive war. But now we've got continuing work. Of course, that goes on all the time as far as getting peace going on to it. The main thing you'll see about from the war standpoint is we saw videos this morning of protesters already into the Democratic National Convention, which, as Pastor Tim said, 68 it was in Chicago, and now it's in Chicago. The problem with a political party that you try to reach out to the fringe, most political parties try to politic to the middle and govern to the right. That was Nixon's strategy. But when you begin to move in, Zach, to the radicals, you're trying to serve two masters, and it collides with you at some point. That's why the Democratic Convention in 68 and now are happening just like they did, is because now you've got what I consider radicals on that side, and you're trying to serve both of them, and it just doesn't work. You want to have that collision with middle America and with the far left or the far right.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, younger generation is we're seeing now the leaders that are trying to come into power are those who have been in these indoctrination camps, colleges, where they've been having all these thoughts input into them for a generation. Eric Metaxas talks about that when he was in college, and he's not a young man, about how he saw what you're seeing now on college campuses back then. So what we're seeing now on college campuses will, in the next generation of leaders, 20, 30 years down the road, this will be kind of what we're seeing on college campuses, be the forefront. And so now's the time to deal with this and as a country come together and understanding, like Randy's talking about, the similarities of, say, 68 and the wars that happen now and the protests that we're seeing in literally happening right before our very eyes in Chicago at the DNC. So if we can understand the natural implications, then we can then gain a greater understanding of the spiritual implications. Because there's the saying going around, which is very true, of the natural reveals the spiritual. And so right now we have to recognize the natural, if they're allowing themselves to manifest in the manner that they're manifesting, what's really happening in the spirit. And that's what we want to get into today.
So in 68, Randy, do you see things that were birthed then that we're seeing manifest now? That any parallels there? I think that would help our viewers is to the progress. I guess if we could see the digression of a nation that started then, and the warning is if we don't stop it now, a few years from now, we're going to have another digression. We're going to keep digressing away from our founding fathers' purposes.
We are the ones that began to give it away, the country. If anyone's read Return of the Gods, I think is a good example of that on a highly spiritual level. Right. But in the natural, it's like I told Zach that day that we talked. America had come out of a World War II. We were heroes. We were now the power. And something happened, something short-wired in the 60s. I believe it had a lot to do with John F. Kennedy's assassination. I think John F. Kennedy had decided to clean up and straighten out some things in America. And instead, we ended up with the Vietnam War. For those of you that didn't live it, to me, this may sound like warmongering, but when war started, we wanted our good war.
Yeah.
We were America. We were the policemen of the world, and it didn't end up that way. But also in the 60s, we began to let the enemy chip away on the 7 mountains, the education, the religion, the patriotism that the country had back then. And Vietnam was very bad about that. For you that didn't live there, for those that did, remember our people would come back who fought a war and they would be spit on and disgraced at the airports instead of returned because we lost a war. Yep. America is not good. We're not good losers. No. And so that started the breaking down of America in the 1960s.
Wow. And for me, that's the Jesus movement season. People are getting born again. The church is growing. But the problem was that the church was disengaged politically. I mean, they voted, they did that, but that's about it. They may talk to their friends a little bit. But for the most part, they were absolutely disengaged. And we had a whole culture because they came out of the hippie movement, out of the free thinking movement, and they just we're going to just worship Jesus and we're not going to worry about what happens in Washington. And that's what my leaders, as I was growing up in the church, were telling us. Don't be involved in any of that. Do your vote, do your civil duty and vote. But that was it. And so we surrendered the political arena to the secular society, and we're reaping that right now. That's why we're on this program today, trying to get you engaged, and you are. I realize most of you watching us are, but please share this with others that are not. And this whole, I'm going to disengage because it's all evil. It is evil. And if we don't get involved, it's going to grow in evil. And that's why I asked him that question from 68. We have grown in evil since 1968.
Yeah, and something to add, too, is what we talked about when we were talking about 68 is the Chris Reed word, because that's kind of our pivot point there.
Right. That's right.
Of he talked about there being 2 assassinations. And so we've already seen one attempted, failed. So that's where, as you're seeing the power of prayer and intercession to prevent what the enemy's trying to do, but then there's possible a second. And if you've been paying attention to anybody in the prophetic, everybody's been warning the past week, more specifically, about there being another attempt on possible President Biden, possible President-elect or VP Kamala Harris, and or President Trump. So there's still a reason for us to pray to prevent that from happening. That's what Chris Reed has been promoting, is that, hey, let's not be a nation who goes and drops to this level, because then you're talking about, the term that's being thrown around by everybody is a banana republic. That gets on 10 on 10 scale if you go to that level and just start popping off potential candidates there. So, and that'll lead into other Venezuelan aspects there for what Kamala Harris is doing. So we have to realize that, okay, even though we don't necessarily agree with such and such candidate, but we have the opportunity now to create our own altars to the Lord, to be able to naturally take back those grounds that have been given up over what you guys are talking about, the past generations.
So here we are. We're seeing the parallels. It's very clear. We're coming back to it's like full circle. It's weird in society, except the fact that we're worse off than we were then. Now you have a Democratic convention. These guys are coming together with an agenda that is all over the place. And you have the block voters, the questions of what's going to happen with the block voters, the African-American vote, the Jewish vote, and different things like that. What do you foresee when you're looking at this convention, their agendas? What are you seeing their goals are here? I don't know if they got any goals. There's no policy on Kamala's website. You look on her website, no policies whatsoever. There's an awakening of that. What's that guy, Lemon, CNN, used to work at CNN?
Don Lemon.
Yeah, he went out on the streets and interviewed African Americans, and what they thought of Kamala, and they all were trashing her, and he was shocked. He couldn't even believe that the African American community was that educated, that they see it for what it is. So I'm wondering if there's an undercurrent that we're not aware of. I'm praying there is. that we have to move forward with. But when you look at this convention, what you saw then in '68, where you are now, it looks like they're trying to make another push towards socialism, toward Marxism, communism type mindset. Do you agree with that, or any points on that?
Oh, I do, and I honestly believe that the election will probably be decided when the televising of the national convention is over. We all know, we talk about America being divided.
Yes.
Well, we were divided in the 1860s. We fought a civil war and killed 700,000 of each other. That was brother against brother. We were divided in the 30s. We were divided before World War II with the America First isolationist movement, not want to get involved in the war. So we've been divided before. But what always wins elections is the middle vote. You've got the 40% here, you've got the 40% there, and it's who can convince that middle class to vote for them. And I think there's going to be a lot exposed, Pastor Tim, during the Democratic convention, that all amount of politics is not going to change. If people watch it and they see that there is no policy, say, for right now, I mean, I don't think Vice President Harris is even doing any interviews or any public statements. I saw a video the other day where they were at an airport, and the people that follow her, the reporters, she left them and didn't answer any questions. So J.D. Vance happened to be there, and he comes off the plane and goes over to the Harris contention and starts answering questions. That, I tend to believe this election will take care of itself. If they don't, they have to talk to the American people. And I can't believe that the convention is going to go very well if they don't have anybody really in. It doesn't look like anybody's in charge as far as setting policies and so on. How do you explain to the American people that you want to make us a socialist country and you can't even argue the point, or a Marxist country?
Well, Zach, you want to add to that? And I want to play a clip of a black pastor, African-American pastor, after that. But go ahead.
Yeah, this is it. This gets into the debate of what will happen come election time, because in the natural we see, okay, all these non-policies being played forward, even some of them we can get into of how one anti-biblical they are, but the reality of what it's going to come down to is, I agree, the middle, but then also who's counting the vote. Because now we're starting to see, we were talking about it last night, here in a couple weeks, they're going to start universal mail-out balloting in some states. So now you get into things that weren't dealt with since the last election, which are legal ballot harvesting. And now Republicans trying to get on that game, whereas Democrats have mastered that. So now it's going to be about making sure people are diligent in being poll watchers, vote watchers, and you talked about it in yesterday's sermon about those in the back rooms, counting votes illegally is the best and worst thing that we have right now is our phones, but anybody can be a journalist, and there are organizations out there that can give you tips on how to do that, in reporting this stuff and getting it out there. And this is where a benefit of Elon Musk buying X, formerly known as Twitter, will be a benefit to get that stuff out there. Because in another example in Florida, it was 2018. There was somebody who was at a major South Florida prominent county, basically over the elections. She had been caught in 2016, was still in office, known to allow cheating to happen in 2018, got caught again, and only because Governor DeSantis became governor was she then removed. So she was involved in 2 elections, allowed illegal votes to take place. So just because they're caught, just because you have a camera, just because they've been convicted, in some instances, they'll still possibly be in place if those who are in office aren't able to remove those people. And unfortunately, now we're in the time where, because they haven't been removed, because those laws haven't been dealt with, is it's time to, if there is corruption, to possibly expose it and deal with it. And there's prophetic about that, but that's something that we have to be mindful of. Is it's in the minds of those on the left and right, that's where it's going to be. But in the middle it's kind of a toss up to where they are. And so that's one of those things. It's going to come down to election day, and God forbid that it goes past election day.
Well,
Past elections.
and for us, we're concerned for all people groups, and obviously, the African American community can make a big difference in this election. Huge, especially in the states, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, which are the big swing states. So they can make a big difference in there, and the information they need. There's a great documentary out there from a friend of ours named C.L. Bryant called Runaway Slave. And when he did it, he said, when I left the Democratic Party, I left the plantation. And what he saw as an African American was, even though we have freedom in America, he was a slave to the Democratic Party. And they would just use him, and we live in a community with a large African American population, and these politicians show up every 4 years here. I'm saying they realize they need their vote. They throw them a little bit here and there, but the fact is they're not helping them. And the policies of President Trump, he has actually a thing called Platinum. It's called Platinum something. He has a movement to help the African American community. Kamala has nothing. Matter of fact, they asked her if she would help the Black American, African American. She says, "I'm not going to just help one people group. We have to help everybody." And that's just like everybody says that's the stance of the Republican Party, but that actually came out of her mouth. And then President Trump gets up and says, "I have a plan to help the African American community to prosper." So there's a pastor, they call him Apostle Alton Williams of Memphis. Because we have a different skin color on this show today, I wanted to have an African American speak to this issue of the platform of the Democratic Party to the African American community. And I just got a little clip here we're going to play. And I want you to listen to this and pray for that community and pray that this brother be protected, number one. But a voice like this gets out further. I think it'll help all of us. So. Guys, we'll try to get that back up here in a minute. He was talking about the platform of the Democratic Party and what it stands for, and the people that are joining the Republican Party. I think that's the reality. Randy, how has the Democratic Party been able to deceive people for so long and to hide their agenda and hide their values? How do you see that? How have they done that?
Habit is a good word. My father was a Democrat all of his life and never changed parties. Members of my family, the joke was in the South, especially in the deep South, Louisiana, over that you were born on your birth certificate, it said Democrat Baptist. Yeah. So if you wanted to change
it was that written there. No,
well,
okay, it's a joke.
That's
okay.
a joke. That's a joke. I apologize.
No, I like it.
But it's almost true.
Yeah.
And I changed to the Republican Party in 1978. I read Barry Goldwater's Mind of a Conservative, Conscience of a Conservative. And then, of course, Reagan was coming on the scene. And when I went to the Registrar of Voters office to change from Democrat to Republican, he asked me why, instead of just processing my But now this has changed some. President Trump got more percentage of black voters last time, but it's a slow process, and I can't give you an explanation other than people they're in the habit of it.
Yep.
How many people really keep up with everything that's going on the way that? I mean, I'm not bragging on us, but that's what we do.
Right.
That we want to keep up with this. Most people are going to go the day before the election and make up their mind and go vote.
And the polls I've seen about the Democratic Party is that the people are so uninformed on their platform. And like classic example is President Biden doing the debate. We've been talking about his mental decline since he got in office. We've been talking about his policies, and all of a sudden they've hit him, and they put him out in front, and the Democrats says, "Oh, we got a problem." And really, literally, many of the followers did not realize he had declined that much because they don't really keep up with their issues. So this pastor, again, we'll try again here, Pastor Williams, I forgot his name again, but he's going to share, and this is at his church there in Memphis, Alton Williams of Overcomers World Overcomers Church there in Memphis, about who's involved in the Democratic Party. And he's just trying to help the African American community mainly.
Transgenders, gay rights, atheists, Muslims, all of these different groups and more that I'm not even thinking about right now are in the Democratic Party. And all of them are contrary to God's will, which means that they are comfortable over there. It's something evil or not right about the Democratic Party. Simple as that. The Democratic Party today is not the Democratic Party of the 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. Socialists and communists have infiltrated the Democratic Party. And as I spoke to you a few weeks ago, everything about socialism is evil, is contrary to God. Go look at the platforms, policy, and plank of the Democratic Party. It takes the contrary position of God and the Bible. Like Republicans or not, when you look at their agenda, I did this research years ago, and when you look at their agenda, everything is consistent with Scripture. Now, that don't mean some of the people in there, you're going to like all the people. But when I see a particular agenda that they make promise to push, I got to go with that because it ain't contrary to the law.
Okay, this is powerful. Why don't you go ahead and speak to that? He said a lot there, but I think it's very powerful.
Let's remember, too, that the Democratic Party was the party of the Ku Klux Klan. Matter of fact, there were senators and representatives in the Democratic Party that were ex-Grand Cyclops or whatever, and the Republican Party is the one that brought the civil rights movement in. People know what they're told, and that brings up the media. And you were talking about Joe Biden. We knew a long time ago that Joe Biden had issues, but the media protected him.
Yep.
So what was their advantage in the beginning has turned out to be their disadvantage, because now when people found out, they blamed the media. Why did you not tell us this? Why did you? I think that's going to come back to blow. Now, the black voter situation, this man has, hopefully he goes out and speaks as much as he can.
That's right.
That's what it takes is education. And I mean, not to say that we know everything, but I'm going to say again, the difference is we do this. This is what we like to do every day. Your average American, your white American, your black American, they're trying to make a car note and a house note and figure out how to go pay for a $6 box of Cheerios and still make budget meet. They're busy. They're busy. They're not onto this. So maybe watching shows like this can educate people to some point.
That's right.
Yeah, and a big point is, Milton Friedman talked about this, is we have to realize that institutions, governments, and even political parties are made up of people. And in today's terms, the people have changed from past generations. And so no matter our ethnicity or our background, we have to look at, like this pastor was talking about, looking at the policies that are being implemented. And there are, unfortunately, still some policy concerns with, and we talked about this before, with the now Trump candidacy and even the RNC this year, that we want to hopefully help right and get correct. But when you look at the policies that are being put forth by the DNC, not even Kamala Harris, because we talked about she doesn't even have some, like what this pastor said, they're agreeing with everything, almost everything that is anti-biblical, even in more specifically and more importantly, the one where they're trying to push, because it's a extreme leftist position of infanticide even after birth. For the parents and quote unquote doctors to be able to decide. And so, like you talked about there, that's an altar. So that's something, a realization and a lie that has to be broken in people's eyes. And you have to decide is, are you for life or death? It's as simple as that. And this is where, with how society is today, with information overload and fear mongering from the media, et cetera, stuff, even with everybody's, busy schedules and, car note and putting food on the table, that's what we have to start to realize is, look, they can try to throw snow up at you, but in reality, there's a rock coming right behind that. And that rock right now is, do we want to decide on are we going to stand for life or death? And specifically that issue, because that's going to be a key, and that is and has been in the last midterms, and it is right now, a key point for the Democrats to push on for abortions. We talked about it yesterday in your sermon, how the DNC has a mobile unit, Planned Parenthood has a mobile unit outside the DNC for free abortions and free vasectomies. So it's funny how we can't figure out what gender people are, but we know what two solutions on how to protect life or not protect life in this instance. So this is a key issue that Democrats are banking on, unfortunately, for some moderates or in the middle there. And so that's kind of a key issue that we have to pray against, that people's eyes be open on that, and their hearts are going to have to decide on where they want to vote.
And you think about this also when you look at the two different conventions, RNC and DNC. We didn't have any of these issues at the RNC convention. No protests. Didn't have to put walls around the convention center. You didn't have mobile units killing people outside. You didn't have any of that. And it ought to speak to the core values, is that there was no need for that to be there, because they knew that that party knew what they stood for and knew what their value system was. Here, even the protesters are trying to mold the platform in the agenda of the Democratic Party. They want them to be anti-Israel, pro-Hamas. They want them to be pro-death. This pro-choice movement, you need to change the name of that. It's pro-death, and we need to call it for what it is. And they want to make sure that their agenda is the agenda of the Democratic Party. They don't waste their time at the Republican Party convention, because they know it's dead in the water. It will not make it to the platform. And I think that's a big issue. Now, Kamala, we're going to shift here as we're going to get back to the word salad issues, but also her movement towards socialism, Marxism. And Randy, really, I want you to find the parallels between Germany and this. But recently she talked about putting prices freezing on the grocery supplies. And I'm like, the cover that the media has been giving for Kamala has been strong, protecting her. But that struck a chord right there, because now you're touching the core of America. Because we know the history. Most Americans, at least the educated ones, know the history of that's communism. That's what Venezuela did. That's what Russia did. That's what China did. And we know the ultimate end of that process, because now you're in control of everything in society. So on CNN recently, this topic came up about her freezing prices, and actually a sane voice came through and actually confronted CNN on this issue. So I'm going to ask Zach to play that one. We'll play that clip now and let's get that part.
They're trying to deflect attention from the actual inflation that has caused everything in your life to get more expensive. So they need the American people to believe something other than the truth. There is no price gouging. Grocery stores, these things, they operate on very slim profit margins. There is no gouging. There is just inflation. So to go out and say, oh, I'm going to get the federal government involved in setting prices or capping prices or interrupting the flow of the free market economy, let me tell you something. If you like bread lines, product shortages, black markets, hoarding, if you want to recreate the happy economic conditions of The Walking Dead, Kamala Harris has a plan for you.
I think the reason even CNN gets it is there has to be a groundswell, there has to be a situation, there has to be suffering going on before a politician can try to sell socialism and Marxism. In Germany suffered terribly because of the treaty that ended the First World War, and it put there's a story about the man takes a wheelbarrow full of German money to go buy food for his family. Germany was ripe for that. They were ripe for, which is what the Nazi Party was, the National Socialist Party. The government runs everything. They were ripe for that. America was ripe in the 1930s.
Yep.
Socialist candidate ran for president and carried Wynn Parish just south of us here in the election. When people are suffering, and that it breeds socialism and Marxism, and people are going to entertain it, Pastor Tim. See, but that's not here. I think they're trying to sell something that they can't sell in this society right now. Sure, we're hurting because of inflation, and we have high mortgage rates. People don't remember when, 1982, I built a house and I paid 20% mortgage rate. And then I got my bond money at 13.5, and we went and celebrated. So 7%, or I don't know what it is now, that was kind of the norm for a long time in America. Yeah. We're not suffering to the point that the Nazi Germany or the 1930s America with the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and everything just totally decimated our country. So they're missing the point there, I believe. That's even why the CNN man gets it correctly.
Yeah.
You're not going to sell. No. Now, you're going to sell it back to Zach, education in the university system. People, I would have, if you ask someone on the streets protesting at the DNC, define socialism or Marxism to me, they can't do it probably.
Right.
It's just the cool thing to do, is to be a socialist.
That's right. Especially when you're driven by emotions. And I think as we see now, this is going to be an emotional convention. I don't know if you got the stomach to watch it, Randy, but I'm counting on you watching it because I don't. And I'm going to be praying, interceding. That's what I'm going to be doing. But it is right. That's the environment that it's in. Now, one last clip we want to play, and then we're going to talk about the Marxism issue. Because this is a hidden agenda here, and I think we need to recognize what's going on. And maybe we can talk to the fact of Kamala Harris and the fact that I think the Republicans are way underestimating her. I think they don't understand. They've remodeled her. They've repackaged her because I guarantee, had she been running for president, she would have lost after the first few states. And so they've repackaged her, and she's gotten past the biggest obstacle, which is to get nominated. She's nominated, and she didn't even have to get one vote to get nominated. So now they got to package her. And here's the fact: we got to dig into her history and find out who she is and what she believes. She is a chameleon. She'll become whatever she needs to become. And that's not unusual for a politician. Bill Clinton was the classic at that. Bill Clinton would watch polls and change the way he talked based on polls while he was in office and even before office. And it worked for him. It kept the moderates happy. It kept, his base a little bit happy. So he worked it. Well, she's much like that, but we're in a much darker season than we were in Bill Clinton. I thought it was bad in Bill Clinton's era, but it's much, much darker now. So this is a statement she's been saying that we're unburdening ourselves. She's been saying this for a long time. Everybody called it a word salad. Like she doesn't even know what she's talking about. She's just saying words. It's just coming out. So let's listen to her quote and let's put this together. It's a great part from Charlie Kirk on this one.
Mute the audio and restream, Eric. Ready?
President Harris will say repeatedly, what is the quote? The quote is that we can see what can be unburdened by what has been.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. You know?
What can be unburdened by what has been. What can be unburdened by what has been.
Is that word salad or Marxism? It's Marxism. That is, in fact, not at all word salad. It's a Marxist incantation, as a matter of fact. It's like a spell. So you can see the possibility of a world that's unburdened from its own history, which is exactly what Mao Zedong did when he launched the campaign of Smash the Four Olds, the four old characteristics of Chinese society. They were going to make a new China that was going to be unburdened by what had been in the past of China. This is what the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, did when they took over power in Russia, is that they were going to make the new Russia. They're going to make the new man, as a matter of fact. People could become unburdened by what has been so that they could see what could possibly be in the terms of a socialist utopia. So when she says that, I assume, given that her father was a Marxist, I assume she knows what she's saying, and I don't buy her idiot valley speak shtick one bit. I think she's far more smart and far more savvy than conservatives have given her credit for, and she is an outright Marxist. It is very, very clear in her language, and that's what the Democrats want to nominate for president right now, which is kind of horrifying. Vice President.
So let's define, help the people a little bit on Marxism. When we look at it this way, when she's saying, like he used the example there of China, she's saying we want to be unburdened of what we have been as an American. And I don't consider what we've been to be a burden. I find it to be a blessing of what God has put here, Judeo-biblical values. He's prospered our land. We've helped the people of Israel. We've blessed the Jewish people. We've done some right things. And she says we need to unburden ourselves from that and come in. And I think President Obama did something similar when he said that the Constitution was antiquated and, we needed change. I mean, I think it's the same agenda. Go ahead.
Yeah, what the burden that she could be referring to is what Marxism talks about is the injustice of the ruling class. See, when you move from socialism into Marxism, then you've got to eliminate that ruling class. That's the burden that she probably is talking about. So they want an even distribution of wealth. And then, of course, the minute you buy into that, then you're into communism. And we know how well communism works because, Cuba was a great example of that. In the 1980s, their premium car was a 1958 Impala convertible. And they were still driving 1950 Chevrolets in that communist environment in Cuba.
They still are.
We don't want, yeah. There's an aftermarket. It's so big, there's an aftermarket for parts for 50 model Chevrolets. So communism and Marxism has never worked wherever it's been tried. To me, it's still a bridge too far for them to sell Marxism. Now, it can be sold. I think the thing that, going back to her being repositioned, to most people, if we're right in what we're saying, is that most people pay attention from a 10,000-foot level instead of one-on-one.
Right.
She's been portrayed as a rescuer for the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Biden falls to the side. She steps and fills the gap. They've managed to do that very well.
Yes.
Still, exposure to the American people every day, they have to see this example. They have to say Marxism, communism. Somebody sitting in a family group of 6 has to know what the definition of communism is, and correcting even the young people on it.
Right.
Does that make any Exactly.
Yeah, and one thing we have to point out is, like you're talking about with Marx and it's basically an erosion of the foundations. And that's what that separation is. Unburden ourselves of the past. So in America, for us, just like in China, they want to unburden their history.
Right.
Germany want to unburden themselves from their history, their Christian history. And that's the exact same thing that we're seeing play out here. They want to, quote unquote, unburden themselves from our Christian founding, a Judeo-Christian founding specifically. And if we look at what Marx, and even in going back to Russia, the USSR, before it became USSR, is this Marxist movement is in and of itself an atheist movement, anti-God movement. And that's what they want to do. They want to create a separation there from, biblical moral values that we've been founded at, specifically here in America. And to the point of, we talked about, and maybe we can get into this a little bit, is Kamala Harris, even though, she comes off, she cackles, she giggles, whatever, she is not as, idiotic as people seem. People have to remember, she was a DA in San Francisco. She went before a judge. She could articulate her message. And she was one of the hardest DAs for criminals with minor marijuana incidences, and locked up majority of that community in San Francisco. And if you understand that community, you understand that it's kind of like we're talking about, some problems that the DNC has. And so they're trying to push that aside and move forward on these new agendas, where if you go, as I have, lived in South Florida, and you go talk to Cubans and Venezuelans and you bring up what's happening there, they'll talk about, one, how happy they are to be in America because they gained back 50 pounds because they lost so much weight from being in those countries. But then they say they'll tell their grandkids, because they were my friend, their grandkids were my friends, never go back. Don't believe any of this garbage that's being taught on and spoken about on media, because it's a false dichotomy that is being presented. And we'll throw out this example of how Bernie Sanders, talks about, North Korea's good, Venezuela's good, Cuba's good, all this stuff, and those are the places where he went to honeymoon on his wedding, after his wedding, but those are centralized, those are controlled environments where once you go outside those government-controlled environments, they're horrible. And if we're going to look at the examples of, let's say, price controls for a grocery store, you'll love this, Randy. There was an NPR report from 2016 that followed a mother of 3 kids and her going to the grocery store, and how her husband had to take off from work. She had a 6-month-old that she had to carry with her. The reason her husband had to go is because if he didn't go, thieves would steal from her. You can only get 2 of anything. They had to verify identification for buying 2 cans of sardines. They had to have a birth certificate for the 6-month-old baby to prove that they even needed diapers. So these are the things that are possible coming in with these quote-unquote government control that help us make life better, to protect us from the evil capitalists that are out there. And look, there are issues with capitalism in and of itself, if you go too far, et cetera. But in reality, the baseline of it is very beneficial, and it has lifted society and societies around the world higher as far as living standards. And so when we look at the solutions that are being offered from this candidate and this party in itself, because now this party is gonna have to get behind the words that are coming out of her mouth. Yes. That they're gonna have to go forward in unison, whether they agree or don't disagree. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is why we want to pray, is because we want to say, hey, okay, for those voters, if this is what these leaders, like that pastor was saying, if this is what these leaders are going to stand for, this is what they're going to try to push forward on this, voters have to decide, while you still have a chance, even though I talked about the voting issues before, you still have a chance. If you vote so overwhelmingly in one direction or in another direction, or don't vote for said candidate, that they're going to have to either cheat so hard that they get caught, or that the opposite is voted, that they can't cheat enough for us to win. And that's how we're going to have to be able to win back our nation. And Speaker Johnson has talked about this. There are issues everyone's aware of with the election, but until you can get people into power who can actually start dealing with this stuff, and you can create such an a opposite balance to kind of even out this unbalance, this injustice that is there. And that's what we have to focus on, is evening out that imbalance. And this goes back to Rick Joyner's word. I forget the book that he wrote it in, about how we do need both the right and the left wing, even though right now the left wing is kind of out of balance.
Yeah, it was kind of his prophetic word. And I know we sound like we're saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling, but I want you to know something. The sky is falling, and it may not fall today fully, but it's coming down on us. Chuck Pierce's word was many years ago that if we didn't shift America by 2026, we'd be like China. We'd been under the reign of China. Well, I never, okay, that was a long time ago. He had in the 80s. And you know, okay, little by little, but now you can actually see a path toward it. You can actually see that this Democratic Party and the Kamala Harris administration, if there was one, would move us toward that direction. I think that's the scary part about it here. So you said something earlier, Randy, I thought was really important, and we're about to close, but you feel like after the convention, we're going to start seeing everything move. We're going to find out who's who. Is that big? I think what you're saying there is that she can't hide anymore. The convention's either they're going to display what they believe or don't believe, whatever. They can't keep hiding no policies, things like that. And the American people are going to have to start making decisions. The scary part of that is that early voting starts within 17 days. So she could have a catastrophe event or exposed in October, and it's too late. We got to move now. This is the moment, isn't it?
I'm basing that somewhat on trend in history.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago in a private conversation that, you know, that we always hear, they say, we got the worst two people to vote for. Well, that's because they beat up each other in political parties. 1932, people didn't vote for Franklin Roosevelt. They voted against Herbert Hoover because Hoover's his platform going in was, we're going to keep doing what we're doing and everything's going to be okay. The American people didn't believe him. So they, instead of voting, and this is John Gunther, a journalist, they didn't vote for Roosevelt. They voted against Hoover. I'm placing that in my thoughts there. And of course, you didn't have all the changes in ballots in the 1930s. It was probably, most people probably went on voting day and voted in the 1930s.
Right.
There's a big mystery there on how that would go. I still believe this, though. I still believe James Carville and Bill Clinton. I wouldn't trust them to walk my dog, but they were very good politicians. And remember, James Carville wrote against, when Clinton was running against Bush Sr., it's the economy, stupid. He wrote that in the strategy room, and I still believe that's the case. I still hold to the fact that people vote their pocketbook. That's what it means to that lady that's got 3 children and she's got a full job and her husband travels all week. That means still more to her than anything else.
Yes.
And she's not listening to the political mumbo jumbo that we love to talk about. It could very well be wrong because I'm basing it on what I've read in the 30s and the 40s, and that was it's a whole different ballgame in politics. The voting part.
Well, here we are. Zach, anything you want to close with?
I think the question is going to be is does that standard hold from the past, or are we in such a new era that cultural identity and cultural policies overturn, your wallet? And if there's such a flow of, and this gets into an economic question, if there's a continual flow of such easy money as we're seeing right now, that may, at least for the rest of this year, allow people to get through until this election. And then that's a question, then the question of if money's so easy to get to, lower interest rates, financing from every store department that you can think of, putting groceries on layaways and racking up personal credit card debts, if that continues to climb and that isn't dealt with at a level, then we'll have to see if that standard still plays, or is culture questions, abortion, et cetera, stuff like the LGBTQ, Israel versus Palestine, do those questions outweigh the economic? And that's something that I think is yet to be determined.
My daughter agrees with you and tells me I'm wrong. She says that social media has changed everything and that people, especially the young people, they think differently than we did when I was growing up because it was, you got your news on one of 3 channels. You didn't get it on the phone. So when I talked to her about people still vote their pocketbook, she said, you may well be wrong about that because, she's in her 50s now, but she can relate to how the younger generation than I do. Is that?
Yeah, and many people, we're in such a heightened emotional state in America. Passions are going to overwhelm logic at times, and I think people will vote passionately. They believe the lies. They believe Trump's a racist. Trump's this. Trump's all that. There's a great dream out there. And I won't say what I think about how he delivered it. A guy named Randy Kay. I've been following him for a while. I think a very solid, reputable guy. I'll put the link on here on the Rumble page. But he had a dream recently of Civil War or World War III coming. And he saw a World War II soldier come up to Kamala and in this dream. And a Confederate soldier was in there. And so it could have been either way, he felt. But we're on the potential. And this is what the Lord told him in the dream. He said that God has already chosen his man to be the president, but the church is going to have to pursue it to accomplish it. And I think that's just like last 2020. I think we're seeing a repeat cycle there. Well, I have heard pastors say when that they're disengaging because they don't like Trump on this or that or whatever. That is a problem because we can't disengage. We got to engage right now on this issue. And for us, we're building this platform, you to be a part of the prayer team to pray. We're building an altar here. We're building a tabernacle. We're going to repent for what we've done wrong, but we're also going to build what God wants. So if God's chosen his person, which I think we know what that is, and it's chosen person, but it's still up to the church that aligns with everything we've been getting about us participating in the process. We can't just say, okay, God said, he's going to win, so we're just going to go on with our life. We cannot do that. The battle is before us, and we have to engage. So we hope this has encouraged you today, gave you information that you need, intelligence you need. I'd encourage you to watch this video. I'll put it on the Rumble page there, and so that you guys can have that. And it's like 20 minutes or so it's not very long there. Okay, I just posted that. So thanks for being with us today. Tomorrow we'll be praying over the states. I forgot what 4 states we're praying over tomorrow. But each Tuesday we're going to be praying over 4 states, and till we come up to election, to praying for wisdom in those states as we'd walk toward that day. And we want you to tune in tomorrow at noon on that. And of course, Wednesday night we'll be back at 6:30. We love each and every one of you. God bless you. Have a good day, and may the Lord bless America in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, we'll talk to you later.